Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, August 30th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. rushes weapon shipments to Israel. So the U.S. has significantly increased its deliveries of weapons to Israel since the end of July. This was reported by Haaretz on Thursday, and they cited open source flight data. The report said that the spike in arms shipments made August the second busiest month at Israel's Nevatim Air Base for U.S. deliveries since Israel's genocidal war in Gaza began back in October 2023. Dozens of U.S. military transport flights, as well as Israeli civilian and military cargo planes, have landed at the base, mainly traveling from Qatar and the Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, so direct flights from the U.S. So the Haaretz report attributed the rush in arms shipments to U.S. preparations for a potential Iranian attack. The U.S. has deployed additional fighter jets and warships to the region and is vowing to defend Israel from Iran's response to the Israeli assassination of Hamas's political chief on Iranian soil. The U.S. is still expecting that an attack is coming, and they're keeping all their warships and everything in the region. And that was kind of what the Haaretz report was focused on. But I thought that this was more newsworthy here, this fact that the Biden administration has just ramped up the weapon shipments to Israel. So they're saying, that they're doing this to help Israel prepare for a potential attack from Iran. But these U.S. weapons shipments, of course, also continue to fuel the slaughter in Gaza and now this major Israeli military operation that's happening in the West Bank. And this rush in arms shipments, it also shows strong support for Netanyahu as he's been working to prevent a ceasefire deal, doing what he can to sabotage the chances of a deal. And it shows that President Biden and Vice President Harris are not serious about ending the slaughter in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Ministry said on Monday that the U.S. had delivered over 50,000 tons of weapons and other military equipment since October 7th. The ministry said that the U.S. support was crucial for sustaining the IDF's operational capabilities during the ongoing war. They could not be doing what they're doing without this support that, is not getting turned off. There's no indication that this is going to end. And I mean, this goes to show, you'll remember what AOC said at the DNC, that Kamala Harris was working tirelessly for a ceasefire. That was a lie, and it's all just nonsense. And this rhetoric from them about caring about the civilians being killed is just complete lies, because if they really cared about that, then they would not be sending the people killing them all these weapons as fast as they possibly can. All right, so the next one here, Israeli army sets up to control Gaza for years to come. So this article is from The Cradle. The Israeli army is planning to establish a new position within its ranks aimed at overseeing long-term control over the Gaza Strip, Hebrew news site Ynet reported on the 29th of August. The decision comes in the absence of clear strategic goals for the future of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli army, the report says, quote, the Israeli army began yesterday through this appointment to accept the fact that its responsibility for the Strip will continue for years and will expand, and about 2 million Palestinians will remain under its responsibility, end quote. So this, the way that the Israeli media is reporting this is that Israel, accepting the fact as if it's not something that they've wanted to continue to control the Gaza Strip. So this goes to show that they're planning for long-term military occupation. And even if, there was by some miracle a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, the U.S. has already given Israel essentially the guarantee that they would be able to restart the military operations in Gaza after, an initial hostage and prisoner exchange. So this report, this is a senior Israeli security official speaking to Ynet, said, quote, "This new position is not for show. It will have an important role for years to come. Anyone who believes that Israeli control and intervention in the Gaza Strip will end soon, whether by stopping or not stopping the fighting and its decline, or even with or without a deal, is mistaken," end quote. So the Israeli official is saying, even with a deal, our military intervention and control of Gaza is not going to end. All right, so the next one here, the World Health Organization says that Israel agrees to limited pauses for polio vaccination. So the World Health Organization, the WHO, said Thursday that Israel has agreed to limit pauses in its bombardment of Gaza in certain areas to allow the vaccination of children for polio, which has returned to Gaza due to the Israeli siege. So this World Health Organization official for the West Bank and Gaza said that the vaccinations would start in central Gaza on Sunday, where, according to the agreement that Israel, the thing that Israel has agreed to, there will be 3-day pauses in Israeli military attacks in these specific areas to allow the vaccinations. An Israeli official said that the pauses would only take place while the children are actually getting the vaccines, which this Israeli official said is expected to take 7 hours per day. So then outside of that 7 hours, Israel's military operations will continue as usual. So not much of a pause here, but so essentially what they're saying is going to happen is, starting on Sunday in central Gaza, there's going to be a 3-day pause. They're going to vaccinate kids there. And then they're going to move to the south for another 3-day pause. And then they're going to move to the north for the final 3-day pause. And Peppercorn, which is the name of the World Health official, said that the goal is to vaccinate 640,000 children under the age of 10, but he's not sure if a limited pause would be enough. And of course, it's not safe. I mean, if there's not a real ceasefire, who's going to guarantee these people's protection when they're taking their kids to get vaccinated, or when they're going back home from there? And of course, Israel's bombed what they called safe zones throughout this thing. So we'll see if this works out, if they actually can get these kids vaccinated. And Hamas has said that it supports the vaccine drive and that it was ready to cooperate with international organizations to secure the campaign. So the push for vaccinations came after a 10-month-old boy who developed paralysis in his left leg became the first confirmed case of polio in Gaza. And according to health officials, 2 other children have been paralyzed by polio. And for each case of paralysis, that means that there's likely hundreds of other people who have been infected but aren't showing those symptoms yet. All right, so we'll see how that all works out. All right, the next one here, the World Food Program suspends movements in Gaza after the IDF attacks its team. This article's from Al Jazeera. The World Food Program has announced a pause in the movement of its employees in the Gaza Strip until further notice, after one of its vehicles was hit by gunfire just meters from an Israeli-controlled checkpoint. The incident took place on Tuesday night as the vehicle was approaching the Wadi Gaza Bridge checkpoint. So none of the employees were hurt, but you see the picture of this vehicle, and it was shot. Its windows were hit by a few bullets, and they said that the vehicle was clearly marked, and that they coordinated with the Israeli military, that they should have been able to go through there, but they were shot anyway. So they have suspended operations there until further notice. All right, so I want to mention our sponsor for today's show, and that is the Expat Money Summit, which is hosted by Mikkel Thorup from October 7th to October 11th. And this is a summit that is completely taking place online. And Mikkel Thorup is the host of the Expat Money Show, and he is a highly sought-after expat consultant with over 2 decades of experience. He's a fan of antiwar.com. I did his show, I think, last year, and he's an expert on being an expat. And the thing that we talked about was, if World War III breaks out, where's the best place to be in the world? And we settled at that point on South America. So go check that out if you haven't seen it. But this is going to be a summit. You'll learn why international diversification is a must, looking for those to preserve their liberty and wealth. Learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect plan B, how to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore. Headline speakers will include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo, many more. And to reserve your complimentary ticket, your free ticket, go to expatmoneysummit.com. That's EXPAT moneysummit.com. And then if you want a VIP ticket, there is a link in the description. You could click there. You get $100 off the VIP ticket, which includes a few VIP panels hosted by experts, and you get other perks. So you could click that link to check that out, or you could put in the code anti-war, and I'll be on one of those panels discussing, what is the real risk of World War III. All right, so back to the news here. Israel steps up its assault on the West Bank, 18 Palestinians killed. So Israeli operations expanded in the West Bank on Thursday during the second day of Israel's largest attack on the occupied territory since the Second Intifada. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, at least 18 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since Israel launched the assault early Wednesday. The attack is focused on the northern areas of the West Bank. Wafa reported that Israeli forces withdrew from Tublis, but expanded the assault in Jenin and Tulkarm, and raids were also reported in southern parts of the territory, including in Hebron and near Bethlehem. Palestinian Islamic Jihad confirmed that some of their fighters were killed in Tulkarm's Nur Shams refugee camp, saying that they died after a battle against Israeli soldiers. You see the picture here, the aftermath of an Israeli military raid in Tulkarm in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Wafa reported that Israeli forces expanded their assault on Tulkarm to include the Tulkarm camp. Israel sent reinforcements to Jenin, and the city and its refugee camp remain under siege. So Jenin's governor, Kamal Abu al-Rub, told Wafa that Israeli soldiers forced a number of citizens to evacuate their homes and turned them into military barracks. They were told that they could not return to their homes for 4 days. So if you remember on Wednesday when this thing was launched, Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz said that the West Bank must be dealt with the same way as Gaza and called for the evacuation of Palestinians. So apparently some have already been told to leave their houses. They're saying they could go back in a few days, but we'll see if the raid is over by then. So this latest violence, according to Wafa's count, brings the total number of Palestinians killed in the West Bank since October 7th to 668, which is quite a lot. I know it doesn't sound like much when we're talking about Gaza, but this is, if this was happening and independently of what was happening in Gaza, say that wasn't happening. I mean, this would be all the big news, would be all this violence in the West Bank. There's been a very significant escalation of it. The settlers are taking land, and the Israeli government's taking land. So it's just not a good situation. All right, so the next one here, a West Bank village's night of terror. So this article is from 972 magazine, and this is about a settler attack that happened early Tuesday morning near Bethlehem. This was something we covered. On Tuesday morning, the streets of Wadi Rahal were littered with stones and bullet casings, evidence of an attack the night before. According to the Palestinian residents of the village, which is located south of Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank, about a dozen Israeli settlers had driven in, some of them armed. They threw stones at cars and houses, and when residents came out to defend themselves, the attackers opened fire. One resident, 47-year-old Khalil Salam Zaida, who divided his time between Jerusalem and Wadi Rahal, was shot dead. 4 others were wounded. And so Zaidi's murder comes just 2 weeks after a pogrom in the village of Jit, where settlers set houses and cars on fire and shot dead another Palestinian man. And again, this is a typical story here. The military, apparently was close by during this attack, but it took them a while to respond. Even though they were very close to this village during the settler attack, which is a story that you always hear. So the Israeli settlers are instigating this violence, going into these villages and terrorizing people. And, there's stories of them breaking into people's homes and telling them that they're going to kill them if they don't leave, as ways to take over their houses and their land. All right, so the next one here, Western intelligence was used for Kursk attack. So a Ukrainian soldier speaking to the Japanese broadcaster NHK has said that Western intelligence was used to monitor Russian troop activity in Russia's Kursk Oblast before Ukrainian forces launched an invasion of the region. So this NHK report said, quote, he says the Ukrainian military surveilled Kursk using drones and satellites and detailed intelligence data provided by the West that was crucial for the operation, end quote. The U.S. has denied that it was involved in the planning of the invasion, but has offered strong support by allowing Ukrainian forces to use U.S.-provided armored vehicles, missiles, and bombs. So you have the U.S. denying that they knew anything about the plans to invade, that they supported it, yet you have this Ukrainian official saying that Western intelligence was crucial for launching the operation. The Ukrainian soldier, who was described as a spokesman for a Ukrainian brigade, suggested that one purpose of the invasion of Kursk was to demoralize the Russian civilian population. He said, quote, we should not forget about the moral and psychological factor of the Russian civilian population. Our operation was planned both tactically and as a move to demoralize the enemy, end quote. So while the fighting continues in Kursk, the Russians, they continue to make gains in Donetsk toward Pokrovsk, the city that they are closing in on. And there's just no sign of this violence. I mean, very heavy fighting still happening, never ending, it seems like. And there's just no sign of this thing ending, of peace talks happening. Russia is now ruling out peace talks. I mean, it's every day. You look at Russian media, you have the foreign minister, Putin himself, other officials saying, we're not talking with Ukraine after this Kursk invasion. That's it. There's just no sign of this thing ending anytime soon. And there's always that big risk of escalation, especially if they start letting them launch the long-range strikes. All right, so the next one here, U.S.-made F-16 crashes in Ukraine, killing Ukrainian pilot. So a Ukrainian pilot was killed when a U.S.-made F-16 crashed in Ukraine on Monday. The crash is a blow to Ukraine, which just received its first batch of F-16s from NATO countries a few weeks ago. So far, Ukraine has only received a handful of F-16s, and this is the first confirmed loss of one. A Ukrainian official told CNN that the pilot, Oleksiy Mes, crashed while repelling the biggest ever aerial attack launched by Russia against Ukraine. That was, Russia launched a massive drone and missile attack across Ukraine on Monday, targeting the infrastructure. And the cause of the crash is unclear, but we have kind of conflicting claims about it. The Ukrainian military has described it as an accident, suggesting that it wasn't shot down by Russia. A U.S. official told the Wall Street Journal that the crash was likely a result of pilot error. So you have the U.S. saying it's likely pilot error, but a Ukrainian official said that they don't think that that was the cause. We actually have a story on the page that a Ukrainian MP is saying that it could have been taken down by friendly fire. Where is that? So saying that they lost track of where the plane was and that they accidentally shot it down. So again, we have kind of conflicting claims about it, but I think pilot error is certainly possible because the training was rushed. So this pilot Mes began training on the F-16 in the U.S. last fall, and training on F-16s could take up to a year, it could take a few years. That includes classroom training and actually flying the planes. And a big part of it for the Ukrainians is learning English. I think this guy spoke English well. He was like part of the lobbying push to get the U.S. to sign off on delivering the planes. But his training was only 6 months. So that could have something to do with this. And Ukraine is facing a shortage of pilots who can operate the F-16s and has been frustrated by the limited number of training slots available in the U.S. U.S. officials told the New York Times this month that 20 Ukrainian pilots are expected to be capable of flying the jets this year. The officials said that 2 pilots are required for each deployed F-16. The planes are designed to be operated by 1 pilot, but they may require 2 for a deployment so that each pilot has relief available. So still just a small number of pilots that have been trained, and they've lost at least 1 now. All right, so the next one here, Hungary warns against allowing long-range strikes inside Russia. So on Thursday, Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó warned against allowing Ukraine to use Western weapons to launch long-range strikes inside Russia. So I know I've probably butchered his name, so my apologies to the one person in Hungary who listens to the show that I'm aware of. But Szijjártó said, quote, "If long-range attacks hit the territory of Russia, then the risk of escalation will only increase. We don't want this," end quote. So the meeting of EU foreign ministers this was the meeting that was supposed to be held in Hungary, in Budapest. But Josep Borrell, who's the EU's top foreign policy official, he moved the meeting to Brussels. Hungary recently took over the EU's rotating presidency. And when that happened, Orban, the prime minister, went over to Ukraine, he went over to Russia, and he went over to China on this peace mission, trying to convince Zelensky to talk with Russia, talking to Putin about chances for peace. And the EU was furious about this. So Borrell moved the meeting from Budapest to Brussels to punish Hungary. So it was kind of a contentious meeting to begin with, and it looked like they had a lot of disagreements. So during the meeting, Borrell pushed for giving Ukraine the ability to launch long-range strikes in Russia. He said, quote, the weaponry that we are providing to Ukraine has to have full use, and the restrictions have to be lifted in order for the Ukrainians to be able to target the places from where Russia is bombing them. Otherwise, the weaponry is useless, end quote. So this meeting was also attended by Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign minister, and he said the same. He's also said that you got to let us strike deep inside Russia. And Hungary also opposed a proposal from Borrell to sanction Israeli ministers Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir over their rhetoric. Borrell was saying that they're inciting war crimes. They certainly are inciting a lot of things like that. Hungary, Orban is close to Netanyahu, supportive of Israel. So, of course, you have some EU officials who are good on the war in Ukraine. Very few. Most, it's really just Hungary and Slovakia right now. But you do have some EU officials who are better on what's happening in Gaza. But then they're just horrific. They just want all the intervention in the world in Ukraine. And then you have Hungary, who's opposed to the proxy war in Ukraine, but they are supportive of Israel. So after the meeting, the Hungary's foreign minister described Borrell's proposals as reckless and said that Hungary wanted peace. He said, quote, "We do not want more weapons in Ukraine. We do not want more deaths. We do not want an escalation of the war. We do not want an expansion of the crisis in the Middle East. Today, we continue to stand for common sense and peace," end quote. All right, so the next story here, the IAEA says that Iran is enriching uranium below weapons-grade levels. This article is from Jason Ditz. So on Thursday, the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, released its confidential quarterly report on Iran's civilian nuclear program. Almost immediately, as often occurs, the report was leaked to a myriad of media outlets. So nothing in the report was especially shocking, but confirmed that Iran's enrichment of uranium has continued. Absent any new deal, Iran is not meeting all these demands that the IAEA is making of it. They're making these demands that's far beyond cooperation expected of any other nation, and there's no longer a JCPOA, the nuclear deal. So the media coverage, I mean, this is Jason's article is kind of a response to the media coverage. The IAEA puts out quarterly reports on Iran's nuclear program, and then they get, there's these big headlines, and the headline now is Iran enriching uranium, near weapons grade, but they're enriching uranium at a level of 60%, which is below the 90% needed for weapons grade, and they've been doing that for a while now. So these headlines, this isn't anything new. And so it's just kind of scaremongering headlines that we see about Iran's nuclear program. The 60% enrichment is the highest level that Iran's ever done, and they actually did that in response to an Israeli covert attack on their nuclear program back in, I think, 2021. So, again, this isn't anything new. And their stockpile of enriched uranium has grown, but that is also just because of the lack of any sort of nuclear deal for them to send their enriched uranium to be turned into fuel. Jason knows a lot about nuclear stuff, so he's always good at covering this. But, we'll probably see more of this kind of scaremongering, fear-mongering about Iran's nuclear program. It's always worth pointing out that Israel is the country that has nuclear weapons. And they have a secret nuclear weapons program that is not subject to any IAEA inspections, and the U.S. does not officially recognize it. All right, so the next one, the last story here, Jake Sullivan ends his China trip with a meeting with Xi Jinping. So Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, wrapped up his visit in China, and he got a meeting with President Xi. This article is from the South China Morning Post. The first U.S. national security advisor to travel to China in 8 years, I was not aware of that fact, stressed the importance of intense diplomacy with the country as he capped his visit with a meeting with President Xi Jinping. Addressing reporters after the talks on Thursday, Jake Sullivan said Washington's relationship with Beijing would remain competitive, but the two major powers needed to manage ties responsibly. He said, quote, "We're doing that through this very detailed and painstaking multiple rounds of diplomatic effort, and it's not to arrive at a certain end result where everything's just resolved. It's rather to arrive on a stable basis so that each of us can stand up for our interests. This is what this trip was about. That's what the diplomacy of the last few years has been about, and we do believe that it puts us in a position to increase the prospect of stability in this relationship," end quote. So that's an interesting quote. I mentioned this maybe yesterday or last time I talked about Sullivan being in China, is that the way the Biden administration frames its talks with China is not to resolve anything. They're just saying, oh, we're managing our competition. And that's what he just said. I mean, he said the point of this diplomacy is not to reach a certain end result where everything's just resolved, basically saying it's not going to be resolved. I mean, that's kind of, that was always my interpretation of what they were saying, but now he's just saying that. So I think it's good that the U.S. and China are talking, but it doesn't really seem like these talks get anywhere. So in his meeting with Sullivan, Xi, the Chinese president, said China's goal is to develop sustainable, stable, and healthy ties with the United States. He said, quote, "It is hoped that the United States will meet China halfway, look at China and its development in a positive and rational manner, see each other's development as an opportunity rather than a challenge, and work together with the Chinese side to find the right way for the coexistence of the two great powers to promote stability in China-U.S. relations," end quote. So he sounds much more diplomatic. And so earlier in the day, Sullivan met with a Chinese military official. I want to find this because I think it is important. This warning that he got, the vice chairman of the powerful Central Military Commission, he warned Sullivan that Taiwan is Beijing's uncrossable first red line. This is a warning that we see from Chinese officials a lot. They call Taiwan the first red line that must not be crossed. He said that Washington must stop its military ties with Taiwan, stop arming Taiwan, and stop spreading false narratives about Taiwan. So this is the warning that China always gives the U.S., but this seems a little stronger than usual. He said, quote, resolutely opposing Taiwan independence and promoting reunification is the mission and the duty of the People's Liberation Army. We must respond to the reckless provocations of the Taiwan independence forces, end quote. And they always say that those forces are being emboldened by the U.S. and all this support. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ted Postal, Biden's new nuclear strategy and the superfuse that sets it off. One from Stephen M. Walt, the murky meaning of Ukraine's Kursk offensive. One from Ramsey Baroud, Erdogan's war on the UN, the brutal wish of failed Israeli diplomat. One from Tom Slater, how Facebook became Biden's personal censor. One from Brian McGlinchey, small U.S. agency victimizes millions of foreign innocents. So this is an interesting story about the Office of Foreign Assets Control, which is basically a bunch of lawyers who enforce sanctions all over the world that affects millions of people, hurts millions of people all over the world. So go check that out. But that is it for me. That's it for the week. I hope to see some of you at the Ron Paul Institute event this weekend. That should be a good time. If you're, this is coming out Friday, so there's still time to buy tickets. There's a link in the description. If you can make it to DC, $85, it's definitely worth it. Always a good time. And there's some great speakers there. But that's it. I will be back after this weekend. You could always support antiwar.com, telling your friends about it, share this show, like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff helps. Follow us on social media. I'll be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.